I was late for the most important meeting of my life to finally meet my fiancé's reclusive, notoriously difficult billionaire father. On my way, I stopped to give my only lunch and my expensive cashmere scarf to a shivering homeless man on a park bench. When I finally walked, flustered and late, into the grand dining room of the mansion, I froze. The same homeless man I had just helped was sitting at the head of the table. Before we get into it, I'd love to know, where are you watching the story from? Tell me your story in the comments. Also, make sure you are following our channel. It helps to keep bringing new, juicy stories for you. Okay, let's head back to that fateful day. The invitation, when it came, was not an invitation at all. It was a summons. It arrived via an email from a law firm, its tone as cold and impersonal as a court order. Mr. Arthur Sterling requests the presence of his son, Mr. David Sterling, and his companion, Ms. Ava Peters, for a formal dinner at his private residence. It was the meeting David had been hoping for and dreading for the entire 2 years we had been together. David's father was a ghost, a legend in the financial world. He had built a multi-billion-dollar empire from nothing, and then, a decade ago, had vanished from public life completely, retreating into the seclusion of his vast walled estate. He was, by all accounts, a brilliant, eccentric, and incredibly difficult man. He had disowned his own older son, David's brother, for marrying a woman he deemed unsuitable. And now it was my turn to be judged. The week leading up to the dinner was a masterclass in anxiety. David, usually so calm and confident, was a nervous wreck. Ava, you don't understand. This isn't a normal meet the parents. My father doesn't do normal. This is a test. Everything with him is a test. My entire future, our entire future, our wedding, everything. It all depends on him approving of you. He had given me a list of rules, a conversational minefield to navigate. Don't talk about your job at the nonprofit. He thinks charity is a weakness. Don't mention your parents' humble background. Stick to safe topics: art, history, economics. Wear the navy blue dress I bought you and the cashmere scarf. He values appearances. And for the love of God, he had said, his eyes wide with a desperate, pleading fear, do not be late. He believes tardiness is a sign of a disordered mind. I spent the morning of the dinner feeling like I was preparing for an audition rather than meeting a future relative. I rehearsed my safe topics in the mirror. I pressed the dress and the scarf until they were perfect. My stomach was a tight, churning knot of nerves. I was so focused on not failing this ridiculous, arbitrary test that I almost forgot to be a human being. I decided to take the train to his town, a wealthy, secluded enclave an hour outside the city. David was already there, having gone ahead to prepare. The plan was for me to take a taxi from the station to the estate. But as I stepped off the train, the sheer, overwhelming pressure of the day made me feel like I couldn't breathe. The station was about a mile from his estate. I decided to walk, just to clear my head, to feel the solid ground beneath my feet. The walk was like a journey into another world. The streets were quiet, lined with impossibly large mansions, hidden behind towering hedges and ornate iron gates. I felt like an intruder, a simple girl from a world of pavement and concrete, trespassing in a land of privilege. I checked my watch. I was cutting it close, but I still had 20 minutes. It was on a small, beautifully manicured green that bordered the road that I saw him. He was sitting on a park bench, and he was the only thing in this entire perfect town that looked out of place. He was an elderly man, his clothes disheveled and worn, his face etched with deep, tired lines of a hard life. He was shivering in the cool afternoon air, his thin jacket no match for the breeze. He looked lost, hungry, and completely, utterly alone. My first instinct, the one conditioned by a week of my fiancé's panicked instructions, was to walk past. Don't get involved. Don't be late. Don't show up looking anything less than perfect. But then I looked at his face, at the quiet, profound sadness in his eyes, and my grandmother's voice echoed in my head from a long time ago. The measure of your character, my dear, is how you treat someone who can do nothing for you. To hell with the test. I changed course and walked over to the bench. "Excuse me, sir," I said softly. "Are you all right?" He looked up at me, his eyes a surprisingly clear and intelligent blue. "Just a bit cold, young lady," he said, his voice a low, raspy whisper. "And I seem to have missed the lunch service at the local shelter." I looked at the simple sandwich, turkey and Swiss on whole wheat, that I had packed for myself for the train ride. It was the only food I had. Without a second thought, I took it out of my bag. "Here," I said, offering it to him. "It's not much, but it's yours." He looked at the sandwich, then at me, a strange, unreadable expression on his face. He finally took it with a quiet nod. "Thank you," he said. "That is very kind." I saw him shiver again. On impulse, I unwrapped the expensive, soft cashmere scarf around my neck, the one David had insisted I wear. "And you need this more than I do," I said, gently draping it over his thin shoulders. He looked down at the scarf, then back up at me, his intelligent eyes seeming to see right through me. "You are a very kind woman," he said. I just smiled, wished him well, and then, checking my watch, I realized with a jolt of panic that I was now officially, irrevocably going to be late. I hurried away, my heart pounding with a new kind of anxiety. I had failed the test before I had even walked through the door. I had no idea I had just passed the only test that truly mattered. I left the old man on the park bench, the warmth of his grateful smile doing little to soothe the cold, rising tide of my own panic. I checked my watch, 5:12 p.m. I was now 12 minutes late for the most important and most terrifying meeting of my life. I practically ran the last quarter mile, my sensible heels sinking into the soft, manicured grass of the sprawling lawns that lined the private road. The gates to the Sterling estate were even more intimidating up close. Two massive wrought iron behemoths with a golden S elegantly scrolled into the metalwork. I pressed the button on the intercom, my voice trembling slightly as I announced myself. "Ava Peters, here to see Mr. Sterling." There was a long, silent pause that felt like a judgment in itself, and then a loud, mechanical buzz as the gates slowly, silently swung inward. The driveway was a long, winding river of perfectly paved asphalt, flanked on either side by a veritable forest of ancient, majestic oak trees. It was less a driveway and more a private national park. At the end of it, the mansion itself came into view. It wasn't just a house, it was a statement. A sprawling, 3-story stone masterpiece of classic architecture with wings that stretched out like a bird of prey and dozens of tall, dark windows that seemed to watch me like 100 unblinking eyes. And waiting for me at the top of the grand, sweeping stone steps, standing under the imposing portico, was my fiancé. David was not smiling. He was pacing back and forth, a caged animal of pure anxiety, his phone clutched in his hand. The moment he saw me hurrying up the steps, his face, which was already pale with worry, hardened into a mask of raw, unfiltered anger. "Ava, where in God's name have you been?" he hissed, his voice a low, furious whisper as he rushed to meet me, grabbing my arm. "You are 17 minutes late. 17! He hates tardiness. I told you this. I told you how important this was. This is a disaster, a complete and utter disaster." "I'm so sorry, David," I said, my voice breathless from my run. "I know, I'm so sorry. I was walking from the station, and there was this old man on a park bench. He looked so cold, and he hadn't eaten, and I had to stop." He stared at me as if I had just started speaking in a foreign language. "An old man?" he repeated, his voice full of a stunned, horrified disbelief. "A homeless man? You were late to a meeting with my reclusive billionaire father? A meeting that will decide the entire future of our lives because you stopped to chat with a homeless man?" "I didn't chat," I said, a flicker of defiance cutting through my own anxiety. "I gave him my sandwich. He was hungry, David." It was then that his eyes fell upon my neck. His face, which was already a mask of fury, seemed to contort even further. "And where," he asked, his voice now dangerously quiet, "is your scarf, the cashmere scarf, the one I bought you specifically for this meeting?" I gave it away," I whispered. He was so cold. "You gave it away?" he said, his voice rising to a choked, incredulous squeak. "A $700 scarf to a bum? Ava, what is wrong with you? Do you have any idea what is on the line tonight? This isn't a game. This isn't one of your nonprofit charity cases. This is my father. He judges everything. The way you look, the way you speak, the way you dress. And you show up here late, flustered, and without the one expensive, respectable thing you were wearing?" His words were like a series of small, sharp slaps. He wasn't worried about me. He wasn't even angry. Not really. He was terrified. He was a scared little boy, desperate for the approval of a father he barely knew. And in that moment, he saw me not as his partner, but as a liability, a loose cannon who had just jeopardized his inheritance. His cruelty, born of his own fear, was a painful thing to witness, and the old me, the me from a few months ago, would have been crushed by it. But as I stood there on that grand, imposing porch, a strange, quiet calm began to settle over me. I had made a choice on that park bench. I had chosen compassion over punctuality. I had chosen kindness over a cashmere scarf. And if that was the choice that made me unsuitable for the Sterling family, then so be it. I had passed a test that was far more important than his. Just then, the massive carved oak doors of the mansion swung open. A tall, impossibly thin butler in a classic black and white uniform stood there, his face an impassive mask. "Mr. Sterling will see you now," he said, his voice as dry as old paper. David immediately straightened his tie, his panic returning. He grabbed my hand, his grip cold and sweaty. "Okay," he whispered frantically. Just let me do the talking. Smile, be polite, don't mention the man on the bench, don't mention the scarf. Just try not to say anything stupid. Please, Ava, just please be perfect." He pulled me through the doorway, into a foyer so vast and so silent that the sound of our footsteps echoed on the black and white marble floor. The air was cool and still, and the walls were lined with priceless works of art that were watched over by the stern, painted eyes of what I assumed were generations of Sterling ancestors. The house was not a home. It was a museum, a cold, unloving gallery of wealth and power. The butler led us down a long, silent hallway. With every step, my heart pounded a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. I felt like I was walking the Green Mile, on my way to my own execution. I squeezed David's hand, a silent gesture of reassurance that was meant more for him than for me. He was right. This was a test of my suitability, my breeding, my worthiness. The butler stopped in front of a pair of towering dark wood doors. "Mr. Sterling is waiting for you in the main dining room," he announced. As we approached the doors, I could hear a single, low voice from within. It was a man's voice, raspy and quiet, but with a strange, familiar cadence that I couldn't quite place. My heart stopped. It couldn't be. The butler pushed open the grand dining room doors. My fiancé was still whispering panicked, last-minute instructions in my ear. "Remember, don't talk about politics, don't..."
But I wasn't listening to him anymore. I wasn't even looking at the magnificent 20-foot-long dining table or the glittering crystal chandelier that hung above it. I was frozen, my eyes fixed on the single man sitting alone at the far end of the table, a single place setting before him. It was him, the man from the park bench. The butler, a man so tall and thin he seemed carved from a shadow, pushed open the grand dining room doors, the movement as silent as the grave. The room beyond was a cavern of baronial splendor. A single, impossibly long mahogany table, polished to a dark, mirror-like shine, stretched the length of the room. A magnificent crystal chandelier, unlit, hung from the high, vaulted ceiling like a captured constellation. And at the far, far end of that table, seated in a high-backed chair that looked more like a throne, was a single, solitary figure. My fiancé, David, was still hissing last-minute, panicked instructions in my ear. Remember, firm handshake, make eye contact, don't talk about your job, whatever you do, don't mention... But his words had dissolved into a meaningless buzz. I wasn't listening. I wasn't even breathing. My entire being was focused on the man at the end of that table. My mind was in a state of frantic, desperate denial. It's not him, I told myself. It can't be him. It's just a coincidence. An old man in similar, shabby clothes. That's all. You're just stressed. You're seeing things. But then the man moved. He lifted a hand to adjust something around his neck, and I saw it. Draped elegantly over the shoulders of his worn, threadbare jacket, a slash of impossible softness and color against the drab fabric, was my cashmere scarf, the one I had given away an hour ago. I froze in the doorway, my feet refusing to move, my body turning to ice. David, finally realizing I was no longer beside him, stopped his panicked whispering. "Ava, what is it? What are you staring at? Let's go," he hissed, tugging at my arm. And then he followed my gaze down the long, intimidating length of that table, and he saw his father. The reaction was a sight to behold. My fiancé, who had spent the last week treating me like a fragile, incompetent child who needed to be managed, now looked like a terrified little boy himself. The color drained from his face. His confident, if panicked, posture completely collapsed. His mouth fell open, and a small, strangled sound, half gasp, half whimper, escaped his lips. "Father?" he stammered, his voice a disbelieving squeak. What are you doing? What are you wearing? Are you unwell?" The man at the end of the table did not answer his son. He didn't even look at him. His eyes, those same clear, intelligent blue eyes that had looked at me with such quiet dignity on the park bench, were fixed on me. And he smiled. A warm, genuine, and completely familiar smile.
"Welcome, Ava," he said, his voice the same kind, raspy voice I had heard just an hour before. "Please, come in, have a seat. I do apologize for my appearance earlier today. It's an old, and I'm afraid rather eccentric habit of mine." I was still frozen in the doorway, my mind trying to reconcile the image of the shivering, homeless man with the legendary, reclusive billionaire, Arthur Sterling. The two realities were so profoundly at odds that my brain simply refused to connect them. It was my fiancé's panicked, humiliated whisper that finally broke the spell. "The homeless man?" he hissed at me. "You were talking about a homeless man? That was the homeless man?" The dawning, sickening horror of what I had done and what he had said to me on the porch was now washing over him. Arthur Sterling finally turned his cool, intelligent gaze upon his son. "David," he said, his voice losing all its earlier warmth, becoming as sharp and as cold as a shard of glass. "You look surprised to see me. You shouldn't be. You, of all people, know that I value character, integrity, and simple human kindness above all else. It is the one true currency in this bankrupt world, and I have spent the better part of a decade testing people, trying to find a trace of it when they believe no one of consequence is watching." He gestured to the empty chairs that lined the vast table.
I have had heirs of powerful families, CEOs of major corporations, and ambitious young men just like you sit in this very room. They come here dressed in their expensive suits, armed with their perfect manners and their calculated compliments, and they perform. They all perform." He sighed, a sound of deep, profound weariness. "But a performance is all it is." He then looked back at me, and the warmth flooded back into his eyes, a look of such genuine, fatherly admiration that it made my heart ache. "And then, today, this young woman appeared," he said, his voice now soft again. "This young woman, your fiancé, who you had quite rightly terrified about the importance of this meeting with the difficult, tyrannical old man of the mountain, this young woman who was already late, who knew that every second counted, who knew that her appearance and her composure were supposedly being judged." He paused, his gaze unwavering on my face. "She stopped," he said, the words now a declaration to the entire room. "She was not disgusted. She was not afraid. She did not walk past with a look of pity. She saw a human being in need of warmth, and she sacrificed her own. She sacrificed her own lunch," he continued, gesturing to a small, half-eaten sandwich that now sat on a fine china plate beside him, "so that I, a complete and worthless stranger, might eat. And she sacrificed her own comfort." He reached up and gently, almost reverently, touched the cashmere scarf that was still draped around his shoulders, "so that I might be warm. She failed your pathetic, superficial test of punctuality and appearances, David, but she passed mine, the only one that has ever truly mattered. She passed it with flying, beautiful colors." He then smiled at me again, a smile so full of approval it felt like the sun coming out from behind the clouds. "Now, Ava," he said, gesturing to the chair directly to his right, the seat of honor, "let's have some dinner. It seems we have a wedding to plan and the future of an entire company to discuss." He then glanced, almost as an afterthought, at his pale, trembling, and utterly broken son. "David, you may stay and listen, or you may go. The choice, for once, is entirely yours."
The silence in the grand, empty dining room was absolute. It was a silence filled with the weight of my fiancé's profound public humiliation and my own dizzying, surreal shock. David stood frozen in the doorway, his face a mask of abject horror, looking at the man he had called father, a man who was now revealed to be a complete and utter stranger to him. I, on the other hand, was looking at the man from the park bench, a man I felt I understood with a strange and sudden clarity. With a grace that belied his shabby clothes, my future father-in-law, Arthur Sterling, gestured to the chair to his right. "Ava," he said again, his voice a gentle invitation, "please." My body, which had been frozen in the doorway, finally obeyed. I walked the long, lonely expanse of the polished mahogany table, the sound of my own footsteps echoing in the cavernous room. I felt like I was walking in a dream. I took my seat at the right hand of the king. David, after a long, agonizing moment, finally seemed to find the use of his legs. He shuffled into the room, a disgraced prince in his own father's court, and took a seat at the far, distant end of the table, as far away from the locus of power as he could possibly get. The silent butler from the foyer entered the room as if on some invisible cue, pushing a silver serving cart. He began to serve the first course of what I now knew was to be the most excruciatingly awkward dinner of my fiancé's life. The conversation, when it began, was not between father and son. It was between Arthur and me. David remained a silent, miserable ghost at the far end of the table, pushing his food around his plate. Arthur, my eccentric, terrifying, and surprisingly gentle father-in-law, completely ignored him. He was focused only on me. He did not ask about my finances, my education, or my family's social standing. He asked about me. He asked me about the book I was currently reading. He asked me about my work at the inner-city nonprofit,
a job David had begged me not to mention. I told him the truth, my voice gaining confidence with every sentence. I told him about the community garden we were building, about the kids I was mentoring. He listened with a genuine, intelligent interest, asking sharp, insightful questions. He asked me about my childhood, and I told him about my parents, a teacher and a nurse, who had raised me in a small house filled with books and love, but very little money. I told him about the values they had instilled in me, the importance of kindness, the dignity of service, the responsibility we have to look after one another. He said, "They sound like good people. They raised a remarkable daughter." At one point, between the main course and dessert, he reached up and unwrapped the cashmere scarf from around his neck. He folded it neatly. He said, "I believe," his eyes twinkling, "this is yours." He handed it back to me. It was still warm. "Thank you," he said. It was a very great comfort. The dinner was a quiet, profound, and deeply personal interview. And as we talked, I realized what was happening. He wasn't just getting to know me. He was showing his son, in the most clear and devastating way possible, all the things he had failed to see in me himself. He was showing David that the qualities he had urged me to hide, my humble background, my compassionate nature, my unimpressive job, were the very qualities that his father valued most in the world.
When the meal was finally over, Arthur walked us to the door. He addressed his son for the first time that evening. "You have a remarkable woman here, David," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "Do not make the mistake of underestimating her or her values ever again. Your place in my company and in my life is secure, not because of your own merit tonight, but because of hers. Now, go home and be the man she deserves." The car ride back to our apartment was a long, heavy silence. David drove, his eyes fixed on the road, his face a pale, grim mask of shame. I did not know what to say. I had not won a victory over him. We had both just survived his father. When we were finally back in the safety of our own small, humble living room, he broke down. He sat on the edge of our sofa and wept, his body racked with a shame so profound it was painful to watch. He apologized, not just for his behavior on the porch that day, but for the entire 2 years of our relationship, for his cowardice, for his obsession with his father's approval. Forever, for 1 second, trying to make me into someone I was not. It was the most honest, most vulnerable I had ever seen him. And I knew, in that moment, that our relationship was not over. It was just beginning. Our wedding, 3 months later, was a small, quiet, and beautiful affair. It was not at the country club. It was in the sunlit garden of my own parents' backyard. And Arthur Sterling was there. He was not dressed as a homeless man. He was dressed in a beautifully tailored suit, but around his shoulders, worn like a medal of honor, was my cashmere scarf. He was not the scary, reclusive billionaire anymore. He was just my father-in-law, my family. As I stood there, saying my vows to David, a new, more humble, and infinitely more deserving man, I thought about the nature of tests. I had walked onto that estate, terrified of failing my fiancé's superficial test of appearances. I had failed it spectacularly. And in doing so, I had passed the one test that truly mattered. My vindication wasn't in winning a fortune or a place in high society. It was in the quiet, simple, and profound realization that true worth is not measured by what you own, or who you know, or how you look. It is measured always and only by the kindness you show to a stranger on a park bench when you think no one in the world is watching.
An absolutely beautiful story about the power of kindness and a test of character with the highest possible stakes. What do you think of Arthur Sterling's unusual method? Let us know your thoughts on this incredible story in the comments below.
If you were touched by this wonderful story, please show your support by hitting that like button and be sure to subscribe for more heartwarming and satisfying stories. Don't forget to click the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.